I don't have to wear one except in here, so I'm not used to that. Don't know why I forgot it, but whatever. All right, good morning. All right, we're continuing. I see several new faces, so let me explain what we're doing because this is a weird one to kind of dip into. We are making our way through a series called Glorify God in Your Body. We're dealing with some of the cultural issues related to sexual ethics, and so we've looked at how we got here. Why is it that our first class dealt with why is it that our culture is so obsessed with this topic, and why is it so politically charged and this kind of thing. Our second and third classes dealt with the biblical argument for homosexuality and the cultural argument, or the biblical argument more appropriately against homosexuality and the cultural argument against homosexuality. And then last week we dealt with the biblical argument against transsexuality, and today is the cultural argument against transsexuality. And I kind of have tweaked this one a little bit because I came across some material that I thought was just really good and made me change my mind on what to do today. And then next week is our last one, is our last class related to this. I'll be giving you a resource sheet for further study kind of a thing, because we're really hitting the very, very high points of this discussion. So I'll have that ready for you next week. Most of before we do that, before we get into the lesson today in particulars, let me ask you a question to respond to. How would you describe the pop culture's basic view of Christians? How does the popular culture view Christians? Which is to say, how do Hollywood and the media portray us? Hateful, oppressive, yeah. Bigoted is a word that comes up all of the time, right? What else? Yeah, backward art. They'll say stuff like archaic restrictions on sexual norms, right? Yeah. What's that? Unbalanced, one-sided, closed-minded, right? These are words that come up often. Yes, Stephen? Okay, far right, yeah. And which is always funny to me, because to the culture I'm far right, and then to others I'm very not. It's like, I don't have a home. Okay, Bubba. Yeah, backward for sure. Now, is this correct? No, it's not correct. Is this completely false? No, it's not completely false. There are some corners of there are some corners of the church. There are some Christians that may fit these descriptions, right? It's not completely false, but the media and Hollywood tend to emphasize the extreme edges of Christianity, right? They tend to emphasize the very extreme margins of Christianity. Well, you know that to be true of us. You know that to be true of the way we are portrayed in the media. You know that to be true of the Christian community. So is it possible, think just for a moment, consider just for a moment, if it's true of us in the way we're portrayed, is it possible that it is also true of the transgender community? Is it possible that Hollywood and the media misrepresent the mainstream of the LGBTQ community? Is that even possible that could be true? I think it is. I don't think that we're getting the full picture. I think we get the picture that sells, because these people they're not nonprofits, right? They're in it to make money. And so we could have discussions. I'm not interested in them, in these discussions, but we could have discussions on media bias and that kind of thing, and whether it's overt or incidental or whatever. But I think that it is there. These folks are not known for their carefully considered, measured nuance, right? And they're just not. To say that is true of us, I think that's true of everyone that comes across the screen, that they are portraying to us across the screen. And so with that consideration, that we know that we're not accurately portrayed in news media and out of Hollywood, let's also consider the possibility that there may be just as wide of a range of actual experiences within those who experience gender dysphoria as there is within the Christian community, right? Maybe there's as wide of a range of experiences. And I think this is true, that there's a wide range of experiences within those who experience gender dysphoria that we may not have been exposed to. I will readily admit that my circle is not the widest in the world, you know. I'm from a town of 1,200 people. I get that. We didn't have a lot of these kinds of things going on. I will readily admit that most of my interaction with, especially the transgender side of this discussion, comes from Hollywood and news media. And if that is true, then it is very, very likely that most of my experience comes from the extreme edges, right? Yes. Yeah. It is, the LGBTQ issues do get a disproportionately large amount of airtime related to how much of the population they make up, right? And there are probably all sorts of reasons for that, and I'm here to discuss the theology of that and not the politics of that. And so, okay, so as we move through this, just keep that in view, that we may not have the full picture here. I'm coming mostly out of this book that I found incredibly helpful, called Understanding Gender Dysphoria. It'll be on the list that I'll give you next week. It comes from a guy who's conservative evangelical psychologist that deals mostly in gender identity issues. He raised some stuff that, I mean, I didn't agree with about a quarter of the book, but he raised some stuff that I just like, this is brand new information for me, just the wide range of issues going on within those who experience gender dysphoria. But what he says is that we still do not know what the cause of gender dysphoria is. We have some hypotheses, none of which have been completely ferreted out to see. Very likely it is that there are many, many causes for this kind of situation. And we are going to speak mostly to gender dysphoria rather than transgenderism today, meaning gender dysphoria, meaning the feeling of an incongruence between how you feel the incongruence between your sex biologically and mentally, right? So some folks experience this phenomenon where they are a male, but they feel female, or they are a female and they feel male. And so that's what we're mostly talking about. We still don't know the cause. And I think it's very, very difficult, just for my way of thinking, I think it's very difficult to treat anything you don't know the cause of, right? It's very difficult to solve a problem for which you don't know the cause of. It doesn't matter what it is. If you know something's wrong with your car and you know the cause of it, it's really difficult to you can treat the symptoms, like if it's making a funny noise and you don't know the cause, you can turn the radio up, but that doesn't really solve what you have going on. And so this is such an incredibly new phenomenon in our culture that it's hard to get at the root of things. And so we approach this with some amount of humility as a result. But one of the issues I thought that maybe the best we could do is to talk about how we talk about the issues, because I think that for most Christians, one of the biggest issues is how we talk about some of these things. And I find that a lot of people are talking past each other, right? And so you turn on the news and you see talking heads coming from the evangelical Christian side of things and then the transgender side of things. And they don't seem to be talking about the same thing, do they? Like, they seem so far apart that they're worlds apart. Now, this much we can talk about this, where we can discuss how we can fix the issue of talking past one another. And so I'm going to bring up a few categories of how people think about gender dysphoria so that we can have a shot at talking about it with one another in a more respectful, productive way, right? Now, I'm only guessing that is true of the talking heads. I don't actually watch the news. I haven't in ages, and I find that makes me a happier person. So Mark Yarhouse, the writer of this book that I just showed you, brings up 3 categories in which people typically think about their gender dysphoria. And one of them, the first one, is out of the integrity framework. So if you think about being gender dysphoric from an integrity framework point of view, that means this person identifies the phenomenon of gender incongruence as confusing the sacredness of maleness and femaleness and specific resolutions to the gender dysphoria as violations of that integrity. Okay, this is in confusing the sacredness of maleness and femaleness. Now, those who think of gender dysphoria in terms of confusing the sacredness of maleness and femaleness are primarily out of what group you would suspect? Probably us, right? Probably us. This is what we talked about last week. And so the full discussion that we had last week applies to somebody who is coming out of thinking of their gender dysphoria out of the integrity framework. They're likely Christians who are struggling with feelings of gender dysphoria and how to reconcile that with their faith. Encountering somebody who is struggling with this from this point of view, I think that we would want to affirm that their struggle is well placed and let them know that the Christian community, that is, I would rather you struggle with the sacredness of maleness and femaleness than I would anything else, right? If you're struggling with it, I would rather you be coming out of this point of view than, because at least you're still recognizing that there is an objective fact behind maleness and femaleness and a moral reality behind it. I would want to let them know that their Christian community is here to support them as they wrestle with these questions. I would want to encourage them, comfort them, to not leave the church as they wrestle with these things. This is incredibly common. Well, if I don't feel right, then I need to leave to go deal with this, and that is not good, right? If every time you struggled with something you had to go outside to deal with it, like you never come back, right? You would never come back. They will find comfort outside of here. So I would want to say, question it, but stay, and we'll all do this together, right? I would rather they not leave. And we can reinforce the biblical teachings that we talked about last week about the goodness of maleness and femaleness. And that, you know what? You're struggling with that. You have questions about that. I've got questions too, right? There may be different questions, but I don't leave the presence of the body of Christ to ask questions, right? I do that here. Let us not say, why don't you come back when you've got it figured out, right? They'll find comfort elsewhere. And so that is the integrity framework. As a side note, this is the, well, not really a side note. This is the one that we most likely identify with. And most of the time, whenever you see somebody, a Christian, defending the Christian position, they're coming at it from this point of view, no matter who they're talking to. Now, you can see that if you're talking to somebody who does not assume a sacredness to maleness and femaleness, then that discussion is not going to be incredibly productive, right? The last part of that statement, that they will see specific resolutions as violations of that integrity. What he means here is that most Christians, most people that come from this point of view, will see certain resolutions to gender dysphoria, certain remedies to gender dysphoria as outside the lines. Examples of those would be like puberty blockers or sexual reassignment surgery. For most people, me included, I come at it from this point of view, and primarily I think the others have some amount of merit, something to add to the discussion. But I would draw the line at, whenever we're talking about remedies, I would draw the line at like hormonal therapy and physical changes to the body. Right. Okay, so thoughts, comments, questions before we move on to the next? Yes, sir. That only happens when you get older? Yeah. Yeah, I mean, anybody that's raised a teenager knows this. Like, they do really weird things. And part of what causes these gender dysphoric reactions in people could very well be related to that. It could. Yes. Right. Yeah. This is in part a framework is, and so let's make our way. I'm not ignoring the comment. I think we answer it as we go through the next one as well. We do handle it differently, and we want to talk about that as well. Yarhouse calls this the disability framework. I would prefer to call it the mental health framework because I think that fits. I think disability's got some connotations that don't fit here. But he defines this as this person identifies gender incongruence as a reflection of the fallen world in which the condition is a disability, a non-moral reality to be addressed with compassion. And maybe you're a little less comfortable with this one, but still okay, probably still okay here, that we would recognize that gender dysphoria as a result of just jumbled stuff in the head, right? That's the technical way to talk about it, is a product of the fact that Genesis 3 is a reality, right? That's how we would say it. But even secular people may talk about it as a mental health issue or a disability issue. They may say, and the way you hear this is like that they can't help but feel this way or something of that nature, right? It's a mental health thing in the line of bipolar, schizophrenia, or something of that nature in the diagnostic mem. A person coming from this point of view may indicate that their thoughts of gender dysphoria are uncontrollable. And so we have to think about our response if we're giving a response from the integrity point of view, right? From the integrity framework, whenever they're coming from the mental health framework, what's that look like? That looks like you're condemning them for something that none of us want to do that, right? None of us want somebody to feel like we're belittling them and that their mental health problem is a sin. You'd have to consider it from the point of view of like how you would respond to bipolar or schizophrenia or ADHD. Are these things immoral? No. Are there moral ramifications of these things? Of course, right? And so we should adjust how we do this. We may also point to Joy's point, man, that we may also point to that gender dysphoria is the only mental health issue in the DSM that I know fully and totally self-diagnosed. That you're the only opinion that matters on it. It's fully diagnosed. It's the only one in which we try to alter the body to match the mind rather than altering the mind to match the body, right? And it is also the only disorder that we don't attempt to manage, but we just encourage people to embrace wholesale. Like we don't encourage you to live into your bipolar, right? That would be you and people around you. We would be incredibly unkind as Christians to encourage people to be so brave to live into your schizophrenia or something of that nature. It would be wrong. It'd be immoral for us to do that. And yet, this is where we go with this one. It doesn't make any sense for us to do this. We would also want to point out that we believe that this is a result of the fall. It's not a feature of creation. It's a result of the fall. We talked about that some last week with the in-betweenness and combining and that kind of thing, the beauty that exists there. And I would want to try to speak on the same level in terms of, you know what, I've got things about me that are just as messed up as a result of the fall, right? My brain don't work right either. Like, yeah. Like, stick around a little while and you will see that I've got hurts, habits, and hang-ups that are a result of the fall as well. And I mean, so did Paul. Paul who, Romans 7, right? For I do not understand my own actions. For I do not do what I want, but I do the very thing that I hate, right? This is just a reality of living in this world and being on this side of Eden, right? Right. Yeah. Yeah. These are not new questions, right? And we do well to remember these are not new questions. There's nothing new under the sun. It's not from wisdom that we say, why were the former days better than these? Almost sounds biblical. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. We and so we we want to recognize that this is not solely an issue of sin, right? It is, but it's multifaceted. And we would do well to speak to as many. I mean, we're talking about being able to reach people for Christ, right? And we want to be able to do that as well as we can. Yes, ma'am? Yeah, yeah, right. Yes. Abuse is very often a major factor in it. My time at CASA really brought this out for me in a big way. I'm going to share a story about that whenever we get down. So put a pin in that. It's very true, though, that abuse is a huge contributing factor to these kinds of issues. The last one is the one that we hear the most about. It's somebody that comes from this issue from a diversity framework. Your house says there are two forms of it, a strong form of it. And this is that far edge that we see primarily in on our screens, is this desire to deconstruct sex and gender, strong form of the diversity framework. This is the stuff that you're like, I don't even understand what's going on here. Or at least I am. It's very confusing, and it's meant to be. All we're doing is tearing down everything in we're a child having a tantrum, tearing everything down we don't really care. We just want to tear down what's going on right now. The weak form of it has a lot more validity, I think, in it highlights transgender issues as reflecting an identity and a culture to be celebrated as an expression of diversity. Now, related to the strong form of, as a Christian talking to somebody coming from the strong form of diversity framework, I would just suspect that there's a tremendous amount of turmoil in this person's life, and historically going back for a long time, maybe some abuse, but all kinds of stuff going on that has maybe little to do with actual gender dysphoria, but there's probably just a tremendous amount of turmoil that needs to be handled. That is to say that healthy people typically don't go around tearing down everything in their path, right? Healthy, well-adjusted people typically just don't go on rampages like those who subscribe to this strong form of the diversity framework do. Related to the weak form, I think that related to this, we can talk to them about whether or not they're finding true fulfillment in this story, in this community. We do call it the LGBTQ community, right? Are you really finding fulfillment there? And does your fulfillment go any further? Does your sense of belonging go any further than your gender identity or sexuality, right? And how fulfilling is that? Next week, we're going to talk about offering out an alternative story, because the Christian story, which we call the gospel, is one that is all-encompassing. And our culture, more than any previously, has been one that really wants to live into a story, to find their identity in a story, and to belong to a community as a result. I think that's a human condition. That's why God gave us the gospel to live into. But we're going to talk about what our story is, and the story that we seek to portray is, and how we live out that story in our own Christian sexuality, Christian marriage. the person who subscribes to the weak form, we can say, I've got a story for you that goes beyond your gender identity and sexuality, and gives you a community that will love you beyond that, right? It's all encompassing. Your house says, I thought this was just great advice related to this, to keep in mind that the gender identity concerns, while important, may not be the greatest concern in this person's life. They probably are not. Consider together whether there are other pressing issues to attend to, such as marriage or relationships with family members or personal walk with God, education, and so on. Too often, Christians can focus almost exclusively on the very aspect of the person with which we are most uncomfortable, right? There is, I don't know enough about it to say always, but let's say always a deeper issue related to these things that you are very likely more comfortable with dealing with and will actually go further toward doing good in the person's life, will do more to help them through their gender dysphoria than actually dealing with the gender dysphoria, right? There's probably something underneath it. And I became very convinced of this when I worked at CASA. Our organization helped kids in foster care find permanent homes. And we trained our volunteer advocates in a curriculum. It was broken up by different modules, and one of the modules was advocating for kids from poverty, one was advocating for kids from physical abuse, drug abuse, advocating for kids from sexual abuse, and this kind of thing. Well, one of the modules that we taught was about advocating kids who were LGBTQ, right? And I don't remember the numbers, but it said that in that training module, it said that the number of LGBTQ kids in foster care was much higher than the number of LGBTQ kids in the general public. Okay, so I went looking, see if I could find it, and I couldn't find exactly what I'd seen back then, but our local CASA program says that 30.4% of youth in foster care reported being LG or B, while just 11.2% of the general population reported the same. And I'm sure that that holds true for transgenderism as well. So in foster care, 30% of kids are LG or B, and in the general population, that's 11%. Now, that's a big enough difference that you have to say, there's got to be a reason, right? And it seems to me that the reason is either cause or effect, right? Either they are in foster care because they were mistreated as a result of being LG or B, or they became LG or B because of their experiences that ended them in foster care, right? So it seems to me that now, out of the 253 cases that we had, my program had, I didn't know anybody that had been, I didn't know everything about all the kids, but I didn't know anybody that was in there because they were mistreated because they were gay, right? Yes, Bubba. Abandonment is certainly part of it. Yeah. But there's so much related to especially like what they call father hunger, right? Like these kids were not in foster care because they came from a good spot, right? They had been abandoned, or mom and dad were drug addicts. Most of ours were that, and that created an unstable home, or because they were homeless, or because they were physically abused or sexually abused, or that kind of thing. But you can see where if the most trusted person, the person that's you're supposed to be able to trust the most to protect you doesn't and harms you instead, what that can do. Like there are no more guardrails when that happens, right? Yeah.
I think from my experience, it's kind of a combination
Yeah. Yeah. Mhm. Yeah. 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 There's a yeah. We're literally selling what they're in the market for. And, like, that's good news for us. That means we can reach this people group. They're looking for community. We're going to spend our whole class period next week on that because it's incredibly powerful. Yes, quickly, please. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm getting, since you bring that up, I'm getting, for my group, my young adult bunch, we're going to start partnering with the call on some stuff, and I hope that'll lead some of our folks into thinking about doing foster care. Did you know, I'd go into churches when I was doing CASA work, and I go into churches and tell them, did you know if every church in our state had one foster home open within it, there would be no foster kids waiting? One church had, or if every church had one family, that's it, then it would be, the situation would be dealt with. Okay, so as you all quickly go through this, I could talk a lot about that, but I'll quickly go through this. In Acts 17, Paul goes into the city of Athens, and he looks around town, and he takes in their culture. And then he goes to the Areopagus, where the philosophers chew the fat, right? And that kind of thing. And whenever he gets ready to talk to them, he finds for himself an on-ramp to the gospel. And he says to the men of Athens, he says, I see you're really religious. I've been around town. You've got shrines everywhere. And he quotes back to them their own philosophers and their own poets in order to say, I know why you feel this way. Like, I know you're religious, and I know why you're religious, right? I know why you believe this. You believe this. You believe all this kind of squirrely stuff because of Jesus. Let me bring this back. You believe all that because of Jesus, right? And as we tour our own culture, I want us to constantly be looking for an entry point for the gospel. And to ask, where in the world might it be with the issue of transgenderism? Well, folks arguing for the transgender position, they've already cut away this scientific objectivism of the reality of the material, right? That they've said that the most true thing is not the is not the biological reality, right? The most true thing comes from a psychological reality. They've already adopted a posture, which Christians happen to believe that the immaterial reality is the most real thing that we've got. They've already bought into that the most real thing is not actually the material stuff that we see around us. That's actually a Christian point of view, right? That the spiritual is the most real thing there is. That's an oddly spiritual view that the transgender community has taken. This idea that the flesh is lying to us and that the immaterial realm is the truest reality that we've got. Where we've understood things in our culture is believing that it's actually the truest reality is in the mind. It's not in the physical, it's in the mind. Well, actually, the mind is part of the flesh, is it not? The mind is actually part of the physical reality as well. And we believe that truth is to be found in the immaterial. They believe that truth is to be found in the immaterial. That much is true. But we've wrongly defined our brains as immaterial, and that's not right. We know that it is our best deceiver, right? The greatest truth that we have is in the immaterial or spiritual realm. It's not in the physical or the psychological. Our culture is actually on the right track in thinking that the physical world is not the truest reality we've got, that we've got access to. But we hang up at the psychological level when we should be pressing on to the spiritual level. And there's an on-ramp for the gospel. Is to say, you understand this is true, don't you? That the physical reality is not the truest thing, right? But I encourage you to press on past the psychological into the spiritual, right? Help them. They're on the road. Help them down it, right? Now, I will save the rest for next week, but this is just to say that the elders and ministers here know that the mental health and spiritual health are two different things, and that we are spiritual health care providers, right? We are not mental health care providers. So if this comes up, we will help you spiritually for sure. But if something related to this comes up, we will help you as much as we can, and we are all the elders and ministers on the same page for mental health care. And we are all aware of resources in our community that come from a Christian point of view. And so if you have a need, seek one of us out so that we can help you. Don't languish alone, right? That's not what we're here for. And while we may not be able to help, we know people who can. And it's incredibly important. It's of utmost importance that on this issue in particular that you seek out Christian health care, because secular mental health care is just totally untethered from reality on this issue. And we have met with folks that know what they're doing on this front, and we can refer you to quality Christian mental health care as related to all the issues that we've talked about. Okay, let's pray. Oh God, our God, we're grateful for the day. We're grateful to be called yours. We pray, Father, that we would use each day to become more like you, that you would help us to seek our identity in you alone. It's in the name of Christ we pray. Amen.